breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Coby.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Coby, he's James, and let's get started with a question. Why does it feel like us versus them at work?
Yeah. So the short answer is that it boils down to a few different possibilities. It's a lack of communication, tends to be a lack of transparency, and or a lack of collaboration, which in other words means that you're very likely operating in a silo. And we talked a bit about silos in our last conversation. Specifically, we're talking more about the difference between, are you operating in a silo versus are you operating in a stronghold? And I think for the sake of clarity, it's important to kind of restate what we mean when we're talking about silo versus when we're talking about a stronghold. So a silo happens when a team or a department is operating in isolation. It could be due to the structure, the way that the operations are structured. It tends to happen very frequently because of specializations. And silos really focus on their own goals, their own processes, and they are often unaware or misaligned with what other departments are doing. This leads to really poor communications, really poor coordination, and a fragmented strategy if there's a strategy at all. Versus when we talk about strongholds, what we're really talking about is when a team is it's more about defending their turf or resisting outside input, and they're competing with other departments for influence or perks or control. Strongholds really breed conflict and block collaboration. And what I want to focus on in this conversation today is the identification of silos and the frameworks that we use to begin to break them down.
Yeah. And so like the episode our last episode we defined these two and then we dug deeply into strongholds. So if that idea about those departments or those teams are kind of like at war with other departments that kind of act like, they're fortifying their own way, they're protecting what they have and kind of they're really entrenched and really resistant to kind of outside influence or outside changes. If that concept is interesting to you, the last episode that we did, we were talking about teams kind of breeding, hostile and competitive teams.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely check that episode out. But I mean, silos are something that are especially compared to strongholds, a lot more well known or a lot more well understood. But
Yeah.
I do think that we can dig into something that's a little more practical and a very tangible way to kind of outline where they come from and why they happen and what the biggest challenges with them
Yeah.
are. Because again, there really is a lot that there's really is a lot of problems that silos kind of create, and we see them like we go in and help kind of rebuild organizational infrastructure and address workplace culture and those kinds of things. I can't think of an organization that we've gone into in the last 3 or 4 years that hasn't just had like a silo problem for sure. Some of them have stronghold problems like that are
Yeah.
problematic, but almost all of them definitely have at least some level of silo issues.
Silos are really common. And they are, while they are not good, they aren't inherently bad. Or they don't crop up as a result. Like
Hmm.
strongholds are insidious. They
Yeah.
breed conflict. They are at their core, they are a negative thing. They are not good. And so if we are operating in that mentality, you really need to address that because they create significant problems.
Yeah.
Silos aren't good, but they're not inherently going to tear your organization apart. They are going to limit your growth. They are going to create this us versus them mentality. They are going to hinder communication and collaboration, and all of these things that you want are going to become much, much more difficult if you're operating in silos. But
Yeah.
between the two, I'd ra
if you have to choose one, um, choose to work in a silo.
Yeah.
But ideally, what we want to do is make sure that you absolutely are not operating with strongholds because they are bad. Full
Yeah.
stop.
Yes.
We
Absolutely.
want
So
to
again,
help.
check out the
Yeah,
last episode where we really dig into that in a lot of detail.
yeah. But today, I think identifying what silos are, it's good. I think we've done that. We've went into detail on it in the last one. The
Stronghold.
today it's what's that?
Strongholds.
Yeah,
You're looking at strongholds the last episode. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Today I want to like really let's jump into silos
Mhm.
because they're pretty easy to identify. I mean, most people know when they are like
Yeah.
you see the effects very commonly and they're pretty easy to identify in terms of, our departments don't talk to each other
Yeah.
or we everybody is trying to solve the same problem from their own unique perspective and it ends up just creating chaos and mayhem.
Mhm.
Like the effects of them are very obvious, but the remedies seems to escape a lot of organizations.
Yeah, and I mean, like again, the biggest problem with silos specifically is how everything is so inefficient and
Mhm.
implementation of anything that's not completely isolated within the silo tends to always just fall apart. Like any kind of organizational change that's not again uniquely completely within that silo completely almost always falls apart or is never fully implemented because of the nature of it. Because and again, a lot of it is kind of, and I think you have to kind of take a step back and have a little bit of a lot broader perspective on your, again, if you feel like this is happening in your department or in your division or in your location or whatever it is, like think about it. Does our department or whatever, have its own like goals and rules and outcomes? Like is like is the way that we're measured for success, is the way that we're expected to work, is all of that very much defined within the singular isolated
Mhm.
view? And is the expectation kind of at leadership or within other departments that you really need to stay in your lane and that's really how we're supposed to operate? Because like I mean, that's not an uncommon view. It's not an overt like statement or like it's not written in your mission statements or anything like that. But is that the well understood expectation that your team and other teams have? Again, the idea of your own rules, your own goals, your own outcomes, and you're really supposed to stay in your lane. If that is kind of some level of understanding about how work's supposed to be done, then you're built for a silo.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really good way of framing it because there is value in helping people to understand what is their responsibility and what is not their responsibility.
Right.
So when you hear the language of you have to stay in your lane, it sounds somewhat negative and somewhat restrictive. But from an organizational structure perspective, there is some value to that. It's
Hmm.
just understanding when the rules help and when the rules hinder.
Right.
And a hard and fast absolutism of you can only ever like stay in your line and never deviate, head down, tunnel vision, just look at what you're doing is a dangerous mentality.
Hmm.
Stay in your lane in terms of, each department has its own responsibilities and don't try to overstep is I that's where a lot of the intent comes from, but a
Hmm.
rigid adherence to the stay in your lane mentality creates those silos and then everybody just does their own thing without communication, without collaboration, and
Hmm.
though that's when it becomes problematic.
Well, I mean, it really is going back to one of our favorite topics, talking about rules that restrict and rules that empower.
Yeah.
Because I mean, part of the silo expectation of the way that you interact with other departments or the way that your work is kind of rolled out, is it coming from a restriction piece to kind of limit autonomy, to limit freedom, to kind of keep everything uniform and consistent and within your narrow view and your narrow isolation? Then yeah, there's a problem with stay in your lane. But if it's a matter of built from rules and power, it's about we have the ability to kind of work with other organizations. You're empowered to kind of like, explore new ideas. You're, look at kind of jumping in and working with other divisions, departments, specialists to kind
Hmm.
of help make a more holistic solution. But keep in mind, you can't add extra work to their caseload. You can't derail the work there. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it's the idea of stay in your lane of like, of don't negatively impact the work that they're doing and be a distraction is there's value in, again, but it's, you're right, but how the rules are defined, if they're defined
Yes.
to be restrictive, then you're just insulating the silo. But if they're is designed to be empowering, then it's a matter of like, this is to kind of make sure that you don't cross lines and
Yeah.
you don't overstep, but beyond that, kind of color to the corners of the square, because you've got lots of autonomy there, right?
Yeah, makes sense, right? If you've got a marketing department, you don't want your HR department to do marketing activities. That's not what you are there to do.
Right.
Right? If you've got a comms team, you want to be utilizing your comms team to push out your messaging rather than everybody, just pushing out their own messaging. Stay in your lane. That makes sense. But how we define those lanes and how, more importantly, how we encourage communication and collaboration are going to be the difference between operating in with blinders on in silos
Mhm.
versus actually creating a collaborative, high performing organization.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing to understand when it comes to silos is that silos make every problem seem like an isolated issue and in need of an isolated solution,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
The idea of what is the problem that I'm seeing in my department is a problem that only lives within the confines of my department. So the solution only has to solve my department's issue. It's an isolated
Yes.
problem, so the solution it needs to be isolated to solve my problem. And again, that is fine if that is the reality, but that is almost never the reality, because the benefit of specializations is that you're playing your part,
Hmm.
but you're not completely, but you don't, but your department is not actually isolated within the organization. Like, marketing's messages has to come from somewhere. You have to come from product development, or HR can be, is a department, but all the staff are in all the
Hmm.
other departments, and right. And I mean, like even sustainability, sustainability is about trying to find, better solutions for more eco-friendly solutions, but that has to come from products and has to come from, all the other pieces too. So it's a matter of, if you understand that the impact of an issue is not isolated,
Yeah.
then the solution cannot be isolated. But that's what makes silos so dangerous, is that an isolated issue is seen, all you need is an isolated solution. And that's where almost most of the problems come from when it comes to silos.
I really like the way that that is framed because we see that mentality happen very frequently. And I mean, to the heart of what this podcast is about is diagnosing the sickness, not the symptom. And what happens when you take that isolationist approach to solving problems is that what you tend to be looking to resolve is the symptom, right? You're looking to resolve this pain point that you are experiencing. So let's put a piece in place, not necessarily investigating what is the root cause of it and how do we resolve that piece, which is likely going to require input or collaboration from other divisions, other leaders, other departments, so that we can actually address the root cause rather than just this is a problem that I'm seeing, that I'm experiencing, so I'm going to just address this one issue in isolation.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see this with like plans and strategies, where one department makes a plan,
Hmm.
but because of the mandate kind of crosses departments, then every department has their own plan.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this in corporate settings. I mean, we touched on sustainability before. With working with a sustainability team within a corporate setting where they're really pushing out their efforts. They want to make sure that the frontline staff are really aware of everything that the entity, the larger entity, is doing to address sustainability from a environmental perspective, from a number of different pieces, and they're pushing out all of this communication about what the organization is doing. But because this is a broad mandate throughout the entire organization, you also have the comms team pushing out communication about what sustainability efforts are in place. You have product development who is now talking about sustainability. You've got HR talking about sustainability. You've got all of these different divisions and departments and leaders talking about the same thing from within their own very narrow scope. I mean, sometimes it might be a larger scope, but within the context of their particular department, rather than there being a more collaborative effort of, okay, what is the entire organization doing around this? Who's going to lead the messaging? What do I need to pull in from the sustainability team, the comms team, the marketing team? Like, how do we actually align all of these pieces together so that we're not in what we found, what was happening is that the frontline staff were being inundated with all of these different initiatives all talking about the same thing from slightly different perspectives and slightly different contexts.
Mhm.
And because they were pushed out from different departments, they had conflicting priorities, right? Because everybody was approaching the same topic from only their lane,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And there was contradictory messages because there's somewhat competing priorities between different departments.
Yeah.
And this is where leadership really becomes critical to foster collaboration, to break
Mhm.
down these silos. The departments really had virtually no interaction between each other, and
Mhm.
pushing out this information caused a lot of confusion, burnout, and just employees got fed up and didn't care anymore about what the organization was doing because they were inundated with these messages that seemed contradictory.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And then yeah, and then, right. They were
And then
just like,
had the exact opposite effect of had what they were planning, and months of work that each of these divisions were doing is
yeah,
wasted.
yeah, absolutely. But that's just it. Each of the plans or each of the priorities within each division was an isolated issue.
Yeah.
So they created an isolated solution, which was their own communications that went out. But that competition and that oversaturation to the frontline staff, that as soon as they saw anything around environmental or sustainable or they just like tuned
It's
out
oh yeah,
and
the
just
eye
like
roll, the
yeah,
glazed
and
look.
just stopped reading and moved on to something else.
Yeah.
You're right, and it was an absolute disaster and an absolute completely counterproductive effort. But
Hmm.
I mean, that is exactly kind of what happens when we see our priorities or our goals, our outcomes as isolated issues, and we look for isolated solutions.
Well, and what's funny is that all came about because of the engagement survey, and that employees didn't feel that the organization was doing enough around sustainability, right?
Mhm. Right.
So what's really funny to me is that you have these engagements are like gathering this data is really good. And then the company actually used the data that they collected, which is very good,
Yeah.
but they used it in the most inefficient and ineffective way possible, which
Right.
is not very good.
No, absolutely. And this reminds me of another issue that we saw with, or that we dealt with a little while ago. Um, Working with an organization that had a major overtime issue,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So we were talking about we're working with this organization, and we talked to their finance team and their HR team, and they were saying, that they're just like being killed by overtime. And so when, we said, okay, so what's the plan to deal with that? And they were like, well, we're just going to create an overtime policy capping overtime in all the different locations. And we're like, well, what's causing the overtime? They're like, the HR payroll team's like, well, I'm not too sure, but I mean, it just needs to stop. It's like, well, again, that's a
Yeah.
very isolated problem that you're seeing, where you're seeing the dollars and cents of overtime, but you're not really, if you don't know what the cause is, how effective is that policy going to be?
Well, and this is the danger of making decisions based only on line items,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Payroll and overtime was a line item financial problem. So
Mhm.
it required a line item financial solution was the mentality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then we helped dig into what the cause of the overtime stuff was, and there was an understaffing in many of the locations that was causing
Mhm.
people to pick
Yeah.
up extra shifts. There was a wellness issue where these staff that were already there were being burned out and were missing more and more time, so that was causing more of it. There was a scheduling issue where because of the nature of the shifts, they weren't really being able to be effectively utilizing the manpower that they had.
Yep.
So there's all these different issues that, that really kind of came to, that were really influencing, and none of them on their own were the main cause. It was the collection of all these complex issues that was causing all these problems that was creating the need for more overtime. And so this is a thing that I think we want to get to when we're talking about solving isolated problems, is the idea of our favorite question, which
Hmm.
is what needs to exist first before this will become effective. And when it comes to solving the overtime problem, it was like, well, what has to exist first before the policies around overtime will actually work? Is
Yeah.
kind of the question that we always try and pull everything back to. And that really is something that I think is going to be the answer to a lot of the question of why does it feel like us versus the mentality at work, is largely because we're not asking ourselves that question enough when we're implementing solutions to problems that we see.
And the policy approach, there's nothing wrong with that. Having a policy around your overtime use makes a lot of sense.
You have to have
You
that. If you
have
don't
to
have
have
that, have that.
right, right. So the solution that they came up with was logical
Hmm.
and it was needed.
Hmm.
The problem was it wasn't part of a larger strategy. It didn't play into anything beyond this one issue. And
It addresses the sickness, not or the symptoms, not the sickness.
exactly, right? So this is why having operational strategies happen, having human capital strategies, having these strategic decisions made, if you know where you aspirationally want to be, that's
Hmm.
what a strategy is, right? Identify where you want to go and the actions needed to get you there.
Yeah.
Then you can filter your decisions, you can design your solutions in the context of a larger strategy. But
Hmm.
we always need to be looking at, are we actually resolving the root issue here?
Right.
And with the overtime policy piece, as needed as that policy is, and as good as of an idea is to have that policy in place, it didn't actually resolve anything.
No.
All it the it if fully implemented without that identification of what needs to exist first, it would have had unintended consequences.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Probably would have run with less staffing, and it probably would have potentially shut down the location at certain times due to staff shortages.
Right.
Right. Like, I mean, yeah.
So instead, let's investigate when you're presented with a symptom, when you're
Mhm.
presented with a pain point, when you're presented with a problem, identifying what is actually causing that. But
Mhm.
and if you want a solution of we need to fix overtime, then what needs to exist first for that to be successful?
Yeah.
It is such a simple question,
Mhm.
but if you really connect with the intent of asking that question, it can be transformative in how you approach problem solving, how you approach strategic development, how you
Mhm.
approach operational requirements. What needs to exist first for overtime to be successful? What needs to exist first for anything to be successful is really the that's the main takeaway from our conversation.
Yeah, I think actually I'm going to share a little bit of the his of our history with that question because it was transformative for us.
Yeah, it
So
changed everything, quite
yeah, so
literally.
yeah, so when we started Roman 3, we were looking at trying to solve organizational issues. So James again has came from an economic development background and was seeing a lot of issues with businesses around, lack of productivity, lack of performance, lack of a lot of these things we're talking about around, efficiencies
No
and
human capital strategy, no
right.
poor performance,
Yeah.
poor no recruitment strategy, no
Mhm.
engagement. People are burnt out. Like all of the issues that businesses are still experiencing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that, we identified those and we wanted to create a solution to it.
Yeah. So we started building some resources and tools and training around kind of like, like around collaboration and around, optimal performance and innovation and stuff like that. And then we started rolling them out. And a lot of the companies that we were engaging with, they kind of weren't ready for them. They're like, well, our staff are kind of not unmotivated and kind of like not really, wanting to take on these new pieces. So we're like, okay, well, maybe we'll start with that first, and then maybe that'll be step one. And maybe these things around innovation and change and collaboration will be step two. So we started digging heavily into employee engagement and employee motivation and employee experience and building resources, tools, training around that. And then we were working with more businesses again, and they were like, well, actually, they're not ready for that either.
Yeah.
They
And if we're
feel,
being completely honest, the work that we were doing at that time, our clients weren't seeing the type of success that we knew that they should be,
yeah,
right? It just
yeah,
the the strategies were good, the
hmm
intent was there,
yeah,
we properly identified a problem,
hmm
and we created a solution to that problem.
yeah, yeah. And it's funny. So I'm gonna tell this story quickly, but then we actually dug into the full version of this story in our first season on episodes 16, where we talk about how you build a workplace culture, and you'll know why is called in that episode when I get there. But yeah, so then we were okay. So the problem was they're not engaging, they're not motivated because they feel disconnected. They don't feel a part of the organization. They
Yeah.
feel like, that they can't bring their full self to work. Like, okay, well, let's work on those types of solutions and then trying to implement those things. And then when we are doing that, people weren't still having this level of success. It was still better, but still wasn't the level of success that we know that they could have based on all the work they're putting in and how comprehensive the strategies were, we felt at the time. And then we realized, well, why is that not happening? And they're like, well, they don't feel like they can share their ideas. They don't feel safe to speak up. So they don't have psychological safety. What, so then we're like, okay, so we kept kind of asking ourselves at this point, okay, what needs to exist first before they can collaborate, before they can be motivated, before they can feel like they're included and they belong, they can have psychological safety. And we end up kind of falling down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was the reason why we built what we call now the workplace culture hierarchy, that's based on realizing that you have to build the foundational pieces before the things that you want to do can actually be sustainable. And it's a matter of going, okay, if you want to improve employee morale, you have to ask yourself what has to exist first for that to be effective. And the answer is you have to fill out the lower levels of the workplace culture hierarchy in order to actually get there. And this is what brings us back to the idea of the organizational success. So the top of the hierarchy is what we call strive. And in strive is striving for the five types of organizational success. And those organizational successes are successful change, innovation, collaboration, internal growth, and customer acquisition or external growth. And to make those five successes happen, you have to resolve job dissatisfaction at the lower hierarchy, the lower level of the hierarchy, create psychological safety at the second tier, create inclusion and belonging at the third tier, and improve employee experience and employee engagement at the fourth tier to get to the fifth tier of organizational success. And that is how you can really build a sustainable plan. But so stating this, the reason why I felt this is important to share was because now we're saying you have to have those four things resolved before you can deal with collaboration and innovation, which is what you have to do if you want to start fully sustainably addressing silos.
Yeah. It's The hierarchy is such a foundational tool framework to the work that we do and what we talk about. It really understanding how the hierarchy builds upon each other and builds towards those successes. That, like, if we look at what any operational organizational strategy should be framed around, we're trying to achieve one of those five things. We're trying to achieve effective change management or implementing new change pieces. We're trying to improve our innovation and how we work together and create new products, bring new products to market, whatever that innovation may be. We want to collaborate better so that we can actually foster more innovation, or we're looking to scale up our internal operations, or we're looking to scale up our external operations, right?
Mm.
Those five broad categories are what 98% of business strategies revolve around in some capacity.
Yeah.
So understanding what needs to exist first before any one of those five things can be successful is the heart of the hierarchy, and it is the heart of everything that we talk about in terms of organizational strategy, rebuilding, operate, like organizational culture. You need to address job dissatisfaction, because if people are actively ticked off about the factors of their workplace, they're not going to be receptive to change,
Right.
right? They're not going to be receptive to collaborating,
Mhm.
right? So addressing the foundation, like building your strong foundation using the hierarchy, is such an instrumental tool to rely on.
Yeah. So, so we dig into the full picture of the hierarchy. We go into great detail about what's into each of the five stages of it. Again, in season one, episode 16, How Do I Build a Workplace Culture? But for now, I want to talk mostly about that fifth stage, the change, innovation, collaboration, and everything. And we did dig into that in a full episode, which is episode in season one, episode 17, where we talked about kind of connecting culture to organizational performance
Right.
and growth. Um, but yeah, but the idea of going back to silos and going back to kind of the us versus them feeling at work, it is so important to understand that the desire for effective collaboration amongst departments and amongst people really does require that those four levels beneath it do exist, right? Because I mean, the idea of you want you want engaged employees who are there and who want to bring their best self to work, who are dedicated to kind of giving you the highest quality work, who are motivated and who are, again, like they're engaged in their work and they want to, they want to
And
perform, right?
and they feel safe to challenge in a professional manner and raise concerns and bring you new ideas, right? Like all of these things play together.
Yeah. So the thing is that's really kind of what you need if you're going to effectively create a collaborative environment that breaks down silos. So again, because the idea is that the a lot of silos are not necessarily created because of a fully cultural thing. A lot of them, like we talked about before, are operationally structured pieces.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can, but like, here's the thing: if you have that, then you want to change the operational structure, but then you're going to have to be able to effectively manage change. And to manage change, you also need to have employees that don't have job satisfaction, they feel psychological safety, they feel like they can belong and are engaged and motivated for change to be successful. But then once you have that, then you're also at the point where you can actually now collaborate better because people have accepted the new organizational structure that has changed. And then you can look at more innovation pieces, and you know what I mean, like the five successes of change, innovation, collaboration, growth, customer acquisition feed off each other. If you
They
can
are not siloed.
no, exactly. That's just it. Like, you can be nimble and you can change and then you can innovate because you're collaborating more. And then you see more internal opportunities for growth. Then you capture more external growth opportunities. And that's how it all feeds off each other. But the problem is Where most businesses go wrong is when it comes to breaking down silos, just like with innovation and change and customer acquisition, is they try to jam a solution in isolation into their organization without asking themselves the important question, the what needs to exist first before this priority that we have will be successful. And they try and jump up the hierarchy without building the foundations. And what they try to do is unsustainable and then falls apart in front of them. And they often don't know why, but it's because they took the completely wrong approach.
Well, and yeah, you're right. And going back, like us versus them was the heart of this question, right? Why does that exist? Why do I have why does it feel like we are pitted against each other or there's an us versus them mentality? That feeling where that tends to live is in job dissatisfaction. It's in the first stage of the hierarchy. First, probably the first two. People don't feel psychologically safe and may feel like if they say anything, then they may be penalized. But it's very likely rooted in that dissatisfaction piece,
Mhm.
where maybe it's that the workplace is not equitable, right? So you see employees see one group getting benefits or perks that another doesn't, or even that perception of, they have it better or the grass is always greener on the other side type of mentality. Those feelings are often rooted in how we address or fail to address the factors of our workplace and whether or not they are competitive, sufficient, and equitable. And we've talked about that many times. It probably comes up in virtually every conversation
Mhm.
because it is such a critical piece that, I mean, there's a reason why it is our foundational tier of the hierarchy,
Yeah.
because nothing else that you do as you try to move up the hierarchy will be sustainable if you have high levels of job dissatisfaction.
Yeah. But and again, it doesn't always have to be that again, even in an organization with good morale and good,
Yep.
where people kind of enjoy working with each other, there is still that us versus them feeling because it's a matter of like, well, it's like, it's a matter of, again, like we talked about with the sustainability piece, like the different plans. It's almost like, well, their plan and our plan, now that we look at them, like, why do they have their own plan? And it's
Mhm.
more of like, like so there's just the idea of like, well, that's supposed to be our lane to play in. Why are you playing in our lane? Like, even if the morale's good and people, feel
Yep.
psychologically safe, but they're just acting with blinders on. They're acting in isolation, right? And it's that idea of it, it's a much easier thing to resolve if you're not dealing with job dissatisfaction, you have psychological
Right.
safety and those kind of pieces. But separate from what stage of the hierarchy you're kind of stuck on, or what foundations that you have, and then versus the ones that you don't have, it's still a problem right up until the top. And this is why we say that the silo issue is a lot more of a top of the hierarchy,
Mhm.
change collaboration piece, as opposed to we talked about going back to strongholds. We said strongholds really exists primarily because of the job dissatisfaction at the lower level, right?
Yes, and
Um,
that's fair.
Right. But I mean, but this idea of, like what has to exist for this collaborative environment where we're not all looking at isolated solutions to our isolated problems, is that a matter of, we have to just change the structure? Is it a matter that we have to actually have the level of engagement that we need for employees to want to collaborate and want to work together and feel like they can? It's just a matter of, again, what is the things, where are we failing and when it comes to trying to resolve the evolution towards this new, more collaborative model? And basically, what has to exist for us to actually have sustainable success? Because again, the problem that we take is that we just try to jam in a new solution, a new policy, a new piece completely in isolation again, because we haven't done our homework to make sure that we actually have the infrastructure, and the
Mhm.
culture in place that will make this new priority that we've jammed in there to be as important and be as sustainably effective, because we just haven't asked ourselves that important question.
Yeah, it's really interesting how, like, So many times in our conversations, I talk about the need for a plan, the
Hmm.
need for a strategy, the need for like just some strategic vision in terms of what we're doing. And it's funny how even with that, if you have departments that are creating their own strategies,
Hmm.
we're still creating silos, right? Your
Yeah.
plan beats no plan every day of the week. But if you are a part of a large organization with, multiple locations, multiple departments, corporate infrastructure, potentially large, a number of large different groups of employees and classifications, it can be challenging to create that overarching operational strategy. But
Yeah.
every department's plan should be in service to that overall business plan, that overall strategic plan, that overall operation, whatever language you end up putting on it. You have to ensure that each piece is kind of feeding into the next, and how what one department does not only feeds up but also across the spectrum of how what the marketing team is doing is going to help what the core operations is doing, what the sustainability team is doing, what the comms team is doing, what the HR team is doing, right? They're again, don't create your strategies in a silo.
Hmm. Right. Avoid the isolation. And that's
Yeah.
just really, really what a lot of it is. All right. This has been a pretty good conversation. I feel like we've done justice to the silo element after really digging into the stronghold
Mhm.
one last episode. So again, 3 episodes you may want to check out if this was a very interesting conversation with you. Was our last episode where we talked about strongholds in great detail, and season 1, episode 16, where we talk about how to create a workplace culture, where we break down the hierarchy, and then season 1, episode 17, where we talked about these 5 successes and how your culture is connected with your strategy and everything else like that too.
Those three are great. Or you can just binge our entire catalog of, I don't know, what are we at, like 80
83 episodes.
some
Yeah.
episodes,
Yeah. So
because
yeah, you
you
have nothing
really
better to do.
love hearing our voices.
All right, so I'm gonna do a bit of a recap.
Yeah.
All right, so the question was, why does it feel like us versus them at work? And part of that is to figure out, well, in that us versus them feeling, do you think you're operating in a silo or a stronghold?
Mhm.
Again, a silo happens when our operational structure is set up that that we're looking at our own goals, our own processes, and that everything that we are doing is isolated within our team or our division, and we're built to stay in our lane. Strongholds happen when our teams are potentially hostile or in conflict with other departments, where we act as kind of a fortified area that prevents teams from working with others, entrenches them in their own ways, and is resilient to outside influences. But if you're operating, in a silo in the us versus them at work, it's likely because every problem that you're seeing is an isolated issue and requires an isolated solution, divorced of what's happening in other departments, which is why it feels like they're over there and we're here with us. But largely, if we want to actually address these issues, we have to really figure out what is it that needs to exist first before we can start to break down the walls of our silo and make it not feel like it's us versus them at work. And part of that is we really need to understand that we have to create a culture that allows for more successful collaboration, more successful implementation of change, more successful innovation. And that's by asking ourselves that question, what has to exist first before this will become effective? And working our way towards an organizational culture that is rooted in a strong foundation of filling in our needs before we can actually jump onto the next level and not cramming these solutions in without, again, verifying that we have the infrastructure, the culture, the systems that will allow that plan to be sustainable and successful long term. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we're going to feel like it's always us versus them,
Yeah.
and the isolation can become greater, and robbing performance, efficiency, and productivity, which is what really most companies are trying to strive for.
Yeah.
All right. So that does it for us. For a full archive of our podcast and access to the video version hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.